Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your attendance here tonight at this Sydney Community Football Summit. I hope you'll agree that these forums are a welcome attempt to provide a little more transparency and accountability around the decisions and policies that affect us all in the football community. In case you don't know me, my name's Simon Hill, commentator at Fox Sports. I've been involved professionally in the football media for nearly 30 years. So this game is a lifelong passion for me, so I'm as interested in the answers as you are, hopefully. A reminder, please switch off your mobile phones or at least put them on silent. Also, please be respectful, even if the topics we're going to talk about are rather emotive. I'm told we are also live tonight on the FFA website, Facebook and Twitter, along with the My Football YouTube channel. We're going to aim to run for about 90 minutes, although I'll add some injury time if necessary. No recourse to VAR. Hopefully at the end of it, we'll have a clearer insight into what is happening and as to why. So let's introduce your panel tonight, in case you're not familiar with them. FFA Chair Chris Niku, who is a big Liverpool fan, which could make for an interesting few weeks, with the possibility of a Champions League semi-final against Juventus, who just happened to be the team of one of our board members here, Joseph Carozzi. Good to see you, Joseph. Sadly, obviously, both are destined for disappointment because Man City are going to win the Champions League this year. Fellow member Remo Nogarotto is a fan of Inter and is just celebrating their derby win over AC Milan, though he also has a soft spot for Arsenal. I'm not sure two teams are allowed, Remo, in all honesty. We also have three members. Oh, sorry, Kelly Bayer-Rosmarin is with us as well from the FFA board. My apologies, Kelly. Good to see you. I'm told you're a Man United fan, is that correct? Which part of Manchester are you from, Kelly? Thought so. We also have members of the senior management team from FFA with us here tonight. CEO David Gallop, who visits the Hawthorns to cheer on West Brom. You're going up, okay, when he's in the UK. Luke Casserly is a fan of AC Milan and Chelsea. Another double dipper, Luke. Sorry seems to be the hardest word. And don't mess with Emma Highwood because she's Millwall. No one likes them and she doesn't care. We also have with us tonight Joe Collins, FFA Digital. Joe, I don't know who your team is. Sydney FC. Right. We were going with overseas teams tonight, but that's probably a good answer. And we also have with us Anta Isaac, Chair of Football New South Wales, who is an Evertonian, and Stuart Hodge is CEO, who is a Liverpudlian. That's an interesting working relationship. Good to see you all. Thanks for being with us. This is the way tonight is going to run. We're going to have some opening remarks from Chris Niku. Then I'm going to introduce key topics which have proved popular with those of you who have registered for this forum for tonight, and we'll get the responses from our panel. Then after that, you will have the chance to ask some questions primarily on the four key topics, but at the end there will also be the chance to ask questions, I should say, on any other topics that you so desire. So let's kick things off with some opening remarks from FFA Chair, Mr. Chris Niku.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Can I add my welcome to everybody here tonight from the board's perspective, and I've got Kelly, Joseph and Remo here. Very important for us to hear from the community what's important. So I know on a night like tonight you could be doing something else, so the fact that you've come here to share with us your knowledge and your concerns is very much appreciated. When the board came together sort of 4 and a bit months ago, one of the things that we were united in doing is actually getting out to our communities, and this is the 4th community forum. We've been to Brisbane, Newcastle and Perth, and we'll go to Tasmania and South Australia in the next week or so. I don't want to say too much. We obviously went with a 100-day plan which had a lot of initiatives in it, and we're towards day 100, and we'll write to the members to give them an update on that. But I thought it might be useful for me to pick maybe 3 items in that list and just share a little bit of information as to where we're at with it. The first one is the very important and strategic working group of the New Leagues Working Group, which is looking at the separation of the A-League, Y and W Leagues and the model for that to go forward. And there's been a lot of work being done in a short period of time. Anta Isaac, who's here with us and has been good enough to help host this, has, with my fellow director Joseph Carozzi and Crispin Murray, who's not here, done a power of work on that. That is a very important initiative because it'll set the landscape for what FFA and football looks like in this country going forward. So it's got a 31 March date, but people are working towards that, and we can share some more as that evolves. The second item that I wanted to just touch upon briefly is a Women's World Cup bid. Until recently, there wasn't a lot of certainty around the timeline of things, but that's now been announced by FIFA. Last week, FFA put in its expression of interest. A decision is due by next March. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge. My intelligence on the grapevine is that there are 8 countries who have put in expressions of interest but waiting for formal confirmation. We've got South Africa out of the AFC, obviously Australia, Japan, and we understand a North and South Korea bid, which is an interesting proposition. New Zealand from Oceania and Colombia from South America, but we're also told that Brazil and Argentina have also put in expressions of interest. So we see a Women's World Cup as very important because one of the things the board is extremely keen to do is make women's football/soccer the #1 sport for participants in this country. So we will give it a strong go, and we will keep you informed as we go on that journey. And the last item is something that we will touch upon in the forums tonight, which is the infrastructure for our community clubs and our clubs generally. It's an area that some good work and some good successes recently, but there's much to be done, and we want to share with you what the vision is about how we agitate with governments at state and federal level to improve the facilities, given that we're the #1 participation sport. So that's the intro from me. From my perspective, the way these sessions have worked to date is when they're interactive and people asking questions and expressing thoughts or concerns, that makes for a good session. So I look forward to a robust discussion.
We'll do our best. Thanks very much, Chris. All right, let's start on the first sort of major topic, if we like. Basically, these questions have been taken from members of the football community, as I mentioned, who've registered for this event to capture the most common themes. We'll get some responses, and then if you have further questions, then please feel free to ask them. So the first question, the cost of playing football has been described as being too high by quite a few parents, I would imagine. Here's an example of one of the questions we received on this topic. I'm keen to understand the FFA's commitment to reducing subsidising registration fees to make the game more accessible for more people. The current fees are exorbitant and prohibitive. Emma, if we could start with you, could you give us a breakdown of where the money is allocated and what FFA is doing to address this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an important topic to start with, and it's a topic that, particularly in the grassroots space, we talk about a lot. So I'm keen to explore some of the facts and really keen to hear from people's views around the room. I suppose the key thing to highlight initially is that when a player registers, the fee's broken down into some key components. There's the club fee, the association fee, the federation fee, and then FFA's national registration fee. FFA's national registration fee for adults is around $35, and then for juniors it's around the $15 mark. What we do know nationally is that there's a huge range in terms of what players are paying. So players in the NPL space are paying more, and on average in some states that could be around the $2,500 mark. However, in the broader community space, the average fee is around $340. So that's for juniors, seniors, etc. In the mini-roo space, it's around $150 to $200. So there is quite a huge range. When we think about the largest component of that fee, the largest component is actually the club fee, and that will vary from club to club, and that depends on the approach that the club might take around the facilities and what arrangement they have around facilities, their utility bills, whether they pay coaches, and really what value proposition they're actually offering to participants. And parents can then make a choice around which club they choose to take. However, we acknowledge that in that kind of entry-level point, and when we're competing with AFL and NRL and some of the other sports are able at the moment to subsidise that entry-level product. So think about Auskick, you think about NRL, Net Set Go, that's more of a program, and that is obviously subsidised at the moment. And for football, we're not in a position to do that right now, nor can you really compare a program with what we offer to the community, which is the ability to register with a club from 4 years old. And that's what lots of parents are choosing to do within that club environment. So across the board, there's a lot of, I suppose, ranges. There's different issues in terms of participation. And one of the things that we're observing nationally is, despite this discussion around cost of football, we're one of the few sports that's actually growing in a traditional kind of club structure form. So when I look at my other colleagues in cricket, AFL, etc., they're growing in schools and programs, but they're not necessarily growing in club football. That doesn't mean that we're not able to support all children to play our game, and that's definitely something that we need to work on to make sure that it is more accessible for every individual. And certainly, at the moment, kids have a lot of choice, parents have a lot of choice, and they make those decisions based on different things. One could be cost, one could be servicing, what's the value for money that I get, what's the quality of the facility, when I turn up, how well organised is the club, how qualified is the coach, is it a safe environment. There's lots of decisions that are obviously made by the parent, and that's something that we need to work on with the general community to make sure that when a parent chooses our sport, that they have a really good experience and we offer a quality service. And I think that's an area that we need to work on with the community at all levels, with member federations and below. So that's my kind of overarching intro, and really I'm just keen to hear from the floor and happy to kind of address any specific questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I've got one, but if somebody else would like to ask a question, anybody on the panel, it doesn't have to be Emma.
Thanks, Simon. Emma, can I just clarify something? In the play, Greg Story, Lily Pilly, I think we've met before. The component of club component, which you quote, the system was unable to allow us to have a team level cost. So actually what's going on there in that club component is all of the referees' fees, the match fees that go to governing bodies or go to referees' bodies and so forth. So on average, I think you'd find in some well-populated districts that club component's $60, $70, $80, not for a community football, not the 150, 200 sort of numbers that you might see from play football stats. Yeah,
and I think that what we can look at in the system is the total fee and then the club fee. I think the discussion we've had in other states is that there's work for us to do so that clubs can actually show the breakdown, because what's clear is some clubs are offering different things. So some clubs might include equipment, etc., bag as part of the club fee, others may not. So it's important that I think as a starting point that parents have that transparency so that when they're joining a club they can actually see where the various components fit and where their money's going, and then they can make an informed decision as to whether that's the right club or whether there's another option in the local area.
Is there anything that can be done to actually change this bottom-up model, if you like? Maybe a question for David, the CEO. Or does it literally come down to the fact that our TV deal is not as big as AFL and rugby leagues, and that's why we can't subsidise the grassroots in the same way as they can?
Yeah, I definitely think that's an aspiration, is to get to a point where the money that comes down from the top, as you say, Simon, alleviates the impost, at least at the FFA level. So the $8-9 million that comes back to us at the moment, you can certainly envisage a day when there's enough money coming down from a TV deal or a sponsorship combination that you don't have to make that contribution to FFA. We regrettably, in many respects and painfully, we increased the NRF in this year's budget because we simply couldn't feed all the mouths across the game's agenda that we wanted to fund with the $120 odd million that the game currently generates. And that was a painful exercise for everyone, even though it only amounted to a few dollars for each participant, whether junior or adult. In fact, I think for juniors it was only $2, Emma, and I think more for adults, obviously. But yeah, I think you can definitely envisage a time when there's enough money that we don't have to take that. I think this is an issue that was spoken about tonight at the Football New South Wales board, and we have to recognise that for some kids this is a 40-week program, 3 nights a week, specialised coaches. So there is a value proposition around some of the higher fees in NPL as well that other sports don't provide. They don't provide the specialised coaching that kids in these systems can get in NPL clubs. This is where the issue is so complicated. You've also got, of course, the fact that junior fees are going up the line within clubs themselves to fund senior players and coaches, and those sort of costs have to be managed as well if you're running a club, as people in this room are doing. So there's a lot of complexity around it. Yes, AFL and NRL can fund from the top down, but there are other issues across AFL and NRL that give them an advantage. For instance, the government requires poker machine revenue to go back into the community. So you can play junior rugby league on the back of poker machine money coming out of a South Juniors or a Canterbury Leagues club, as Anta knows. So that's something that football doesn't necessarily have the ability to rely on, that huge gaming revenue to subsidise junior football.
In the interim, is there any other practical measures that you can take as the FFA to try and reduce those fees? I will come to you, sir. It won't be a second.
Can I take that one?
Please.
It's often seen as an FFA issue, but I actually think this is one that is
I'm just going over here. Carry on.
Just distract me. A whole of game issue. Like, this is one where we have to work with member federations and associations and clubs to try and, in the first instance, bring the cost down and make it as efficient as possible. And I think there's some work that we can do in that space to raise awareness so that people understand the value proposition and can make those choices, and make sure that we're supporting clubs so they are offering a good service. Whether you're a community club, an NPL club, our goal should be that every club should be offering a good service. So they're practical things that I think we can do today about funding. And then the other things that David's mentioning, that's going to take time for us to work on the revenues in the game. There's lots of people sat with me today that are working very hard on how we do that. But I think despite all of that, when I look at the actual numbers, our competitors are not necessarily growing at the same rate as us in the same areas. So there is definitely something that we're doing right, and not FFA, I mean people in this room that are offering a good service already to parents. And football is the sport of choice for parents, and obviously we've seen the girls' side of the game grow as well. So there's definitely a lot of growth opportunity, but it is one that I think we need to tackle together, and it does require all levels of the game to pull in the same direction.
Roy Belcher from Eastern Suburbs Football Association. Just recently the AFL, and I don't know whether this question is, but we're talking money, so this is money question. The AFL basically came out and said it made $50 million last year, and I see obviously government money going into all the sports. So my question is, what are we doing about making sure that they don't make $50 million a year? I don't mind them making any sport making money, but some of that $50 million would have been a heck of a lot better for all of us. And the amount of players and that we have to support. So what's the FFA doing as far as government goes, and the money that comes out of government?
Yeah, I think this dovetails nicely into a question that's coming, Roy, which is around the facility funding gap that the sport has. The need to, we estimate there's a $500 million gap in what's needed to service the game across community football facilities-wise, whether it's lighting, artificial pitches, dressing rooms for female players, etc. And despite our numbers, and our power is in our numbers, we haven't necessarily been able to attract the government money that our competitor codes have. We all recognise that the eyeballs and the attendances of AFL give them a great place in the professional level of Australian sport. But it's our power, our strength is in our numbers at grassroots level, and that's the story that we're starting to tell government to try and get coordination between federal, state, local governments, state federations. Starts with having a good audit of what's needed across the country, and some state federations, including particularly this one, have done a great job of identifying what's needed, and indeed going and getting pockets of money, even as recently Stuart and Anta and the board talked about tonight, just some of the bits of money that have been picked up in the lead up to the state election. But it's certainly something we can do a better job of. FFA has more resources in its government relations area now. We have a guy, Ricardo, who's in Canberra every sitting week and talking to MPs and ministers about the requirements of the sport. The AFL have a huge TV deal, as Hilly alluded to. They have huge numbers in their attendances and their ratings, and somehow they haven't found anything to spend that $50 million on, which surprises me. But they will tell you that they're supporting a lot of their professional clubs to break even every year. They don't necessarily like to confess to that, but I think they're subsidising the professional level of their game, and also have clubs that are reliant on gaming revenue, just like rugby league clubs in the country are reliant on gaming revenue from leagues clubs. We're a $120 million business. The money that we make goes out the door primarily. We only ever aim for a very small surplus every year, $1-2 million, because we consider that our best use of funds is to push it back out the door. Chris alluded to, there's a big exercise project underway at the moment to look at the operating model of the A-League, how that can be shaped in a way which gets greater incentive for our current owners and new owners to invest, improve the league, get more eyeballs, get a bigger TV rights deal, get more sponsorship, and have that kind of top of the tree funding coming down rather than relying on what's underneath. We've sort of, as I said, we've dovetailed into the question about facilities, and we have got a fresh document which I'm going to hand around, which sort of tells the story that the game is telling at the moment to various levels of government about why the government should support football over the other codes. So I'll hand that round, and people can have a quick look at it.
The other point to add to that as well, I think, is that if we really want to leverage funding from government, we've got to talk with one voice. Our game talks, it's very disconnected at times, and our competitors, when they go to government, they go together. And we're starting to do that now with Football New South Wales and FFA working close together with Football Victoria. But it has to be at all levels because that's what we're competing with. And government wants to see that we're working together and we're pulling in the same direction and our strategies are all aligned. And that's when they feel more comforted to actually invest more in a sport. So again, there's an opportunity for greater alignment so that we can actually leverage the fair share for football. But speaking with one voice is critical in that space.
And it's probably worth repeating again something Chris mentioned, but a bid for a Women's World Cup and the general push towards gender equality in the sport can only be a good thing in helping us encourage governments to invest in us over others. When you see Sam Kerr score a goal for the Matildas, that's got to be turning lights on in government, and then you start to tell the story of our growing participation base for girls and women. It's really what we've got to latch on to.
Yeah, g'day, I'm Bill Owen from Blacktown. How are you going? Thank you all for being here tonight and thanks for taking the time. Obviously, out in the West, money's tight for everybody. And I appreciate your comments around AFL and League having poker machines, but that's the environment we've been in for a long, long time. Currently, from where we sit, obviously the cost at the top end of the business is probably outweighing the deliverables to the bottom end. For a mum and dad that join as a 4-year or 5-year-old and take their child, they've got a lot of limitations in what they've got to do. And you talk about clubs looking at value. whilst that's important, we've still got to be able to get a kid on a park, and that's what we're all here for, put a child on the park to play football. And when we look at it across the board, I think as much as you talk about value, you talk about gender equality, we've got to look at the top end, are we running lean and mean, or are we getting a bit complacent what we bring in? Are we offering true value to our members right down to a mum and dad that joins for the first time or someone that's played for 30 years? And I think when you look at that across the board, and appreciating you've got a lot of demographics, you've got a lot of social areas, and you've got vast areas to cover, but realistically, at the top end, are we lean and mean? The different layers of government that we're running through soccer at the moment. And you talk about money, and realistically, are we going to get cheaper to put a child on the park as time goes forward? All investment in facilities will not make it cheaper for a mum and dad to put a child on the park.
Well, somebody else like to answer that? We've heard a fair bit from David and Emma. Anybody brave enough? Answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Bill. Look, I acknowledge and empathise with the situation. As you know, at Football New South Wales, at least for the last 4 years that I've been on the board and with my colleagues, this is something that we're constantly challenged by to try and deliver more value, because principally it's not just a cost puzzle, if I can use that term. We also need to try and deliver greater value to the constituents. And it's not only the participant players, it's in the form of providing more workshops and coaching conferences, assisting referees, delivering capability building programs to our clubs especially. I know in the last couple of years the FFA and Football New South Wales have been trying to deliver, and I will use this at my own risk to deliver this digital platform, which hasn't gone according to plan so far. And like I said, I'll accept any criticism. But all of these things are about trying to build a platform that establishes a better way to work at every level of governance, right? We talk about, and you rightly point out, are we lean and mean at the top level of the game? If we consider, from what Emma shared with us earlier, between the state body in Football New South Wales and the FFA, from each registered participant, it's anywhere between $20 and $30, right? Will come to Football New South Wales and the FFA. Consider that in the scheme of the total cost of participation. And even if we remove that, right, it wouldn't even make an impact of maybe 10%, right? So we constantly need to understand what we can do to deliver more to the participants and the clubs. We're working with government to get more funding and more grants. Last year, we were, we benefited as a football family from the government's $100 scheme, the rebate, right? Football took advantage of that. There were 160,000 participants that took advantage of getting $100 back in terms of the rebate for participation. The next best, or the next biggest sport, was somewhere like 30,000. It's actually our responsibility, representing all of you, that we need to leverage and push and impose on the government to help us in getting more rebates for our participants, in getting more facilities for our clubs and associations, so we don't have to hire them out from local councils. We have this Light Up Football project last year that I think somewhere in the region of 15 clubs benefited from additional lights. So I understand, Bill, we haven't solved it yet in terms of what goes back to the individual participant. We need to do better, in that respect. And believe me, there's not a meeting of Football New South Wales board and management, and I know from the meetings that I go to with the FFA, to try and understand how we can do that better. We have clubs, and sorry, I don't want to embarrass anyone, Dunbar Rovers, they've got a different model. We need to learn from each other. Where we want to listen. I think this is a great first step. We're challenged by the problem, and genuinely and sincerely, we want to work on how we can improve it.
Probably got time for one more question before we move on to the... we've got a couple of hands up. Sorry, you got the microphone, sir. Off you go.
I'm a Liverpool supporter.
Boo.
I'm a Scouser. Now, thank you. My name's Bill Renton. This is Kurt Johnson from Hills Football. We're one of the new associations. We're about 12,000 players this year. I'd like to thank Stewie, Peter and the boys, the committee from Football New South Wales, support from FFA, who've given us for the last 3 years to grow where we are. We can't grow any further. We're getting battered by AFL, AFL, Rugby League, Rugby Union to a certain extent. They are attacking the schools, and I mean attacking with promotions, with freebies. You mentioned fees. They're about about 25% of our fees. We're growing that fast in the Hills area. We've got no fields. We get one, they get one. They've got about maybe a couple of thousand AFL in the Hills area. We've got 12,000. We've got new fields coming over this year. One, Caddies Creek, Arnold Avenue, bit of a mess. AFL's got a brand new field coming on board. And the numbers are not there. So how can we as football family promote to the Hills, councils and surrounding councils that they have got a lot of growth in the sport?
A lot of this, I think, is cultural, isn't it? The other sports are so ingrained in the Australian psyche that it's almost knee-jerk that they get whatever we do, or perhaps even more so. Maybe Joseph Carozzi would like to speak about this.
I think, Simon, it's a really good point. The other aspect, if I can think of it from another perspective, and as some of you may know, I was on the board of an AFL club in this part of the world for 8 years. One of the things that we in football need to do is develop that sense of urgency that we haven't really had, because everybody from any country who comes to Australia knows football. The other clubs, the other sports, have got to work harder on education, awareness, freebies, give us a try, sampling, free tickets. Sometimes I think perhaps we need to sort of activate the engine and get a bit more mobilised, get a bit more angry, get a bit more vocal. Because listening to these forums, the passion in the room is amazing, but I don't know if we put Stuart Ayres, who's a great sports follower of all sports, if he sits here, or Linda Volz, his counterpart, it has an impact on them. It does have an impact on them. So I think we also need to, the point that Emma made, say the same things repeatedly, let the local communities know that we have got huge followings at grassroots, and healthy, active kids is what we're here to provide. So part of it is about us pulling our collective weight together and making those representations, just like you're doing.
Yeah, but the other side of the equation, with respect, they know that themselves. The other sports, the other codes, they are going to the schools directly. We've done a fantastic job here and the local schools. We've got about, 2 people? They've got about 10 to 12. I'm talking about the Hills area, I'm not talking about outside, who are promoting their sports, offering freebies. And you're talking about the kids. Now, the other side of the fence, the parents won't let them play rugby league because of the physical content. So we've got an advantage there. They're coming over. But when you turn the TV on, it's all AFL, it's all rugby league. Oh, by the way, I haven't got Foxtel, I can't see football. So it's not advertised, free to air. So if there's anything coming forward from FFA regarding free to air, without the World Cup, without the FA Cup, I'm talking about local sport, because that's where the revenue is.
I'll take that one. I think you raise a really great point, because a lot of the limitations that you're describing with other codes being more well-staffed and having more to give away is at every level in the game. They've probably also got 10 times as many people talking to government as football does, etc. And fundamentally, there's not enough money in the game. And the game is supporting far more than AFL is. We're the most played sport amongst boys and girls. We're bigger than netball. We also have to support international competition, the Matildas, the Socceroos. We also have futsal. We have so many different variations and demands that some of the other codes don't actually have. So they have more resources spread over a much smaller, tighter set of activities. And the only way we're going to change that is to get more money in the game. There's limited ways to do that. We already spoke about wanting to reduce the grassroots contribution. If we want bigger TV deals, we need people to actually support and watch local teams. I mean, we're representative of the football community. We all follow EPL and other leagues, and not enough people are tuning in and watching. We can't attract free-to-air unless more people are actually supporting and watching. So one of the other things we can do at a grassroots level is really encourage the young kids to adopt a team, follow a team, and build up the sport in this country, and not keep training all of our... I mean, I do the same with my daughters. They watch EPL, but we're doing ourselves a disservice because we're never going to get the revenue into the game that we want unless we encourage all elements of the local game.
Thank you. And thank you for your support as well. Great.
I might just add my tuppence worth on the question. Well, let me firstly state the obvious. I don't think our game is getting its fair share from government. That's the bleeding obvious. The question, the more pertinent question is, why isn't it getting its fair share from government? And I think there are a multiplicity of reasons for that. But I think David may have touched on it earlier. The strength of the NRL and the AFL is its high visibility in the marketplace, and they've leveraged that magnificently in a political sense. We're the inverse of that. Our level of visibility is significantly lower, but our great strength lies in our grassroots. And there's an old adage in politics that all politics is local, and we need to smarten up about that. Our great strength is at the grassroots level. And we've probably got to stop being polite about that. We've probably got to let politicians know how strong that grassroots representation is by numbers and by the manner in which we sell our game at a grassroots level. Because I can tell you, politicians are very susceptible to messages at a local community level. Emma made a very good point earlier that up to now the game has had a fractured approach to government relations, and now I'm sensing that there is an understanding that it is the sum of the parts that makes us strong, not each of us going out there individually trying to get our share. And I think if we can get that piece of the pie right, we're going to get a more receptive hearing from government. It may not mean rivers of gold tomorrow morning, but I think you're going to see attitudes shift pretty quickly if we flex our biceps, our community biceps, a little bit more.
Okay, sorry, we're going to have to move on because we've already gone for about 45 minutes on that first topic, and we could be here till about midnight, which would suit me, actually. So let's move on to topic 2, which is entitled Player Development. And the generic question that came out of many of you registered for this forum here tonight was this: do we have the right pathways for our junior footballers, and what are we doing to develop the next generation of players? Who would like to take that one? Luke, would you like that one?
Thanks, Simon. As far as pathways goes in the development of national team players, I think I can certainly say and speak on behalf of the national team coaches. When we look at our junior national teams at the moment, our current Joeys who have qualified for the World Cup later in the year are the boys that are born 2002. So majority of those, not all of those, came through the current pathway and system and started with their skill acquisition phase and skill acquisition programs. They didn't have it the whole way. The next group, the 2004s, are the ones that had it the whole way through their development. And we are certainly seeing year on year, when we're either at NPL youth games over the weekends or in particular at National Youth Championships and the like, that year on year we are definitely seeing a or footballers with greater technical quality and technical ability, basically year on year. So I know what when we talk about SAP and skill acquisition phase, the programs are delivered in different formats and by different people across the country. But philosophically, we're certainly seeing a lot of development there. On the girls' side, the same, and with the introduction of GSAP. And I know that in many forums, speaking about results isn't always the greatest thing when we talk about development. But in 2013, 2015, as an example, our junior girls national teams weren't qualifying for the Asian Cup, let alone qualifying for the World Cup. We're now seeing them qualifying for Asian Cups, so the next stage. So we're definitely seeing, from our end, the improvement of the quality of plays, technical proficiency, game understanding, all that kind of stuff. We certainly feel is improving year on year, and the pool of players is getting bigger. And that's kind of the challenge. When we talk about the pathways on the boys' side, it's very much club focused for the elite end. In the pathways on the girls' side, we still have the elite programs based with the member federations around the country. We've got two different challenges when we talk about the girls and the boys' side. On the boys' side, the biggest challenge is opportunity. So whilst the A-League is 9 professional teams in Australia, I'm incredibly excited about the expansion of the league, new teams coming in, potential future expansion, the discussions that are happening around the second division. I have enormous belief in the talent of the players that we have here in Australia. It's the opportunity, and just delighted that those discussions are happening, and there are steps being made around expansion and the second division to give those players the opportunity to play. On the girls' side, it's been a really interesting space. Obviously, we're in a time at the moment where we have this fantastic team of the Matildas. People often refer to the golden generation that we had on the men's side, and we're currently looking at our golden generation with the current Matildas. Virtually all of those Matildas and all the names that you know came into the Matildas really young. They came in at 15, 16, 17 years of age. The team at the moment is so good, it's very difficult for a youngster to break through. So we've had to try and come up with sort of different ideas. So the state-based programs sort of basically finish at under-17s. And then outside of the W League, the most talented girls will play in their respective women's NPL competitions. I guess I have to politely say that as far as the program that's delivered, the amount of training hours and whatnot at the WNPL level, it's probably not at the level for our very best players of 17, 18, 19, 20 years of age to be in. So we have a program that's based here in New South Wales that we call the Future Matildas program. So a lot of our current young Matildas or Matildas that aren't with overseas clubs will train in that more centralised program, so that they have basically the best with the best training every week under the guide of the national team coaching staff, and a number of those girls will then go off and still have a training session per week with their NPL club and play in the NPL for that kind of 9 months of the year, and then go into the W League. So I guess the two streams are very different as far as the approach that's taken to the development and the pathway that they have. But we always look to improve and know that we can do things better. But we certainly feel, and to echo the sentiments of the junior national team coaches, we're definitely seeing better players come through year on year.
Ramo, would you like to add something to that?
Only in respect of the national second division, which is a working group that I'm chairing at the moment. I think there is general consensus in the game that it is not in the interest of the game to have a development pathway which leads to one major senior competition called the A-League. As Luke has pointed out, there are 9 Australian teams in that competition. There'll be another 2 added over the next couple of years, of course. But I think the view of Luke, Graham Arnold and most people in the game is that we need a national second division operating below the A-League. It needs to have the requisite standards around it in terms of development and pathways. But I think it's absolutely integral, Simon, that a national second division is developed to give more opportunities for talented young players. And hopefully in time, of course, that will include women's teams as well, because there's an equal challenge to ensure that the pathways for the girls are appropriate as well. So, I'm pretty excited about the National Second Division. I think it'll catapult us into an area of football which has probably more engagement than is the case now.
Any questions from the floor? Yes, sir. Come on, Joe.
I'm just a sports football lover, so my question is a bit of a curly one. We hear a lot of talk about grassroots and what's happening at the ground level and pathways and so forth, and then you see what the result is sometimes at the top, where decisions are made and there's not enough, clear answers. I think one of the things that we need across the board, starting at the grass levels, is to make sure that governance and compliance is embedded, and there's a model that everybody's got to follow. At the moment, can't see that, and I don't see how that's going to be built. And I think there's got to be a way of actually making sure that, we got the right insurance programs in place, we got the right training in place for people who are in charge. There is a model, there is a training given to them, or there is some structure in place, and there's appropriate police checks, records done, and there's a record of all that's done. Now, I don't know whether that is currently done or whether there is any model in place to see how we actually make sure that our sport is nice, clean, and well structured.
A unified model, Chris? You want Stuart? Yep. Okay. Stuart Hodge, CEO, Football New South Wales.
Thank you for your question. And I think we take member protection very seriously. We have a very experienced member protection department here that is looking into these things, and we do, through the national registration system, then be able to monitor and have a database of all of these things in terms of looking out for our participants. So yes, I think you can have some comfort that we are doing what we can in terms of member protection. Every week we see, sanctions applied across associations and things like that. But we need to keep in mind, we have, 235,000 registered outdoor players plus other forms of the game as well. So we're talking about a pretty vast a number of players out there that we are doing our best to try and ensure there are protections in place, policies are in place, procedures are in place, and they're available on our website, and you can find them if you head on to there.
Agreed. All those policies and procedures are great, but you actually got to be able to monitor that, and you've got to actually be able to trace it and track it down. How do you pick up the bad apples out of all the good apples?
How difficult is it to get a unified model, not just in New South Wales, but right around the country? That's a tough task, isn't it?
Well, we're actually working on a project right now called a National Club Development Program, which touches on the things that you've mentioned, and it's basically about how can we provide a model to clubs. It will be online, and it's something that we're working on with Stuart and his staff, and it touches on all the things you've talked about. How can we make sure that it's a safe club, well run, and then once you get that foundational stuff in place, how can you make sure the clubs are in a position to then grow, become sustainable over time? So we're working on that at the moment, and that's an efficient way that we can actually provide some best practice to the community and give a practical tool that people can use, because we agree, we've got 2,000 clubs across Australia, more than probably every other sport, so we've got to find really kind of innovative ways to better support clubs, giving member federations the right tools as well.
Same topic, slightly different direction. David, I want to ask this question to you. When you're talking about pathways for junior footballers and the development of the game as a whole, obviously it helps if you have a national technical director. That's been one of the things that the FFA has outlined that it wanted to do in its first 100 days. You're not quite over the line yet. How close is that? And will the identity of the new guy or girl, if you know that already, what is their role going to be in providing this overall vision for the game at that level?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some press speculation about this position, and it was pretty accurate, that we are close to appointing a new national technical director. it's a really important role, and I think it'll become an even more important role, if that's possible, in the post A-League new operating model world, where we will need this person and his resources to coordinate the technical direction of the game in collaboration with the state technical systems, but also with the club academy system, which is still in a pretty embryonic stage. A-League clubs have only had academies in place over the last few years, and those are an important development in getting that vertical development pathway in A-League clubs. I think sometimes people forget that the professional clubs in Australia, by and large, are 15 years old at the most, and therefore they don't have the deep connection to the community that the clubs that you talked about right at the start of tonight, Hilly, the European clubs have deep development pathways, and they also have deep community roots. We've got a relatively young professional competition, and it's still getting those kinds of structures in place. Once the A-League is in a new operating model, one that incentivises investment, then that will be a good thing. But it will be important that there's a technical pathway coordinator in that space. I think we have had the benefit of European technical direction over the last 15 years, and of course the big project was the establishment of the national curriculum, but everyone accepts that that now needs some refinement, that it has gaps, that it needs to evolve. Despite it being a great base document, there are identifiable gaps in the curriculum, and to have someone with an intimate knowledge of Australian football, Australian culture, Australian sport, we think will be a next important phase. So I haven't quite given away who it is, but we're close to making that appointment. Let's be clear, that person can't do it on their own though. They're going to need resources, and they're going to need collaborative approach across particularly, I think, the state federation technical network, but also into the professional club network. I think it'll be really exciting to reboot that stuff because, as Luke picked up on, there's lots of good stuff happening. Yes, we have tussles from time to time about club versus country. We're not aligned to the Asian football calendar, and we've just seen this play out in the last week or so with the Olyroos being in a camp getting themselves ready for Olympic qualifiers. A-League clubs are not happy about that. But a strong national team program, and not just the Socceroos and the Matildas, but our junior national teams playing in quality competition, qualifying for world tournaments, is a really important part of the game's growth and future. And we have to find the right balance there when we want those players to play in the green and gold.
Any questions on the topics that we've raised within that topic, if you like? Yes, sir. Just at the front, Joe. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My question would be for Remo. You mentioned how integral the second division would be and how necessary it would be. How would it be commercially underpinned to ensure its posterity to serve as a platform for player development?
Well, I wish I had the answer for you here and now. Again, I'll state the obvious. We can hypothesise about a national second division, but unless it works commercially, it'll be around for 5 minutes. So when I say it needs to work commercially, it needs to work commercially on two fronts. Firstly, it needs to work commercially or economically for the participant clubs. So we need to build a cost base which is realistic, but at the same time recognises that unless we move to full-time professionalism within that architecture, it's a waste of time. There's no point having a national second division competition which is part-time. Building that cost base or getting consensus for that cost base is one of the big challenges that I've got inside the working group, because you could imagine there are some significant differences of opinion about what that cost base should be. But it's also important in terms of the journey that those clubs need to make, because if they have aspirations for the A-League, whether that's under an incubation model where hopefully clubs that participate in the national second division could in the short to medium term be candidates for the A-League in future expansion, or indeed, and I readily wear my heart on my sleeve as a football romantic here, but if in the fullness of time we're able to move towards promotion and relegation, then the gap between the national second division cost base and the A-League clubs needs to narrow over time. Otherwise, those aspirations are just pipe dreams. So it's going to be an evolution and a bit of a journey. At a macro level, the competition itself has got to pay its way. And again, that's not going to be easy because there are significant constraints around that model, existing commercial relationships that we have with broadcasters and commercial sponsors. So it's a significant challenge, and I wish I had the answer for you here tonight, but I don't. But all I can say is that we are very conscious of it, and we do understand that if we're going to start this journey, it's an incremental journey, but it's a journey that has to pay its way. We don't want to set up a national competition that in 2 to 3 years fails, because we will have failed the clubs and we will have failed the young footballers that want to play football in that particular tier. I'm not sure that answers your question entirely, but...
Oh, no, it does, to the extent that you could, I guess.
Any other questions?
One question. You're putting all this effort into the kids developing. You Socceroos, the Matildas. How can we keep these players in Australia? Because all our good players, you've got good coaches coming through. I've done my grassroots, the senior to C licence. I've seen kids come and go overseas, come back a couple of years' time, destroyed, whatever. But how can we keep these good players that we're developing in Australia?
Yeah, I think that's the work that we've been talking about, the expansion in the A-League and a potential second division. You know, particularly on the boys' side, we have, after the age of 16, we have a real bottleneck. There's just not enough opportunities. So I am, yeah, the sooner the better. I can't wait. So we definitely need greater opportunities.
Just a few additional comments. The PFA has done a lot of work around this. So they've actually done a report which shows that the chances of an Australian player succeeding overseas are almost doubled if they stay within Australia for, I'll call it 4 or 5 years, but it's roughly 80 or 90 games. And so I think there's an education piece to the aspirant players that they're actually better off learning their craft here for a few years before taking that step. So we need to, with the PFA, get that message out there about what's best for their career. It's not just jumping on a plane and going offshore straight away.
But interestingly, the Matildas has been a bit different. So we've been asked to keep quite a few Matildas back here and play in the W League, which has been fantastic. But with the development of women's football internationally and the investment that's coming from European leagues at the moment, that might be a challenge for us to retain some of those players here in Australia over the long term as well. So, and what is a player faced with? Particularly, I'm probably more familiar with the women's side. They're faced with, you know, more money, and perhaps the environment that they're being offered is better than what we might be able to offer here at the moment. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge to retain even some of the best female players here in Australia over time. So yeah, it is an ongoing challenge.
Just a one quick question then. Are these players are leaving the country after all this development and all the coaching and everything else are being pushed by their agents to go overseas because they get more money?
Look, I definitely think that plays a part of it. Obviously, there's always now there's a whole new market that's emerged in Asia, and Europe has always been lucrative and attractive. But you know, as much as that may be part of the issue, and agents want to push players away a little bit too early, I think it's just a harsh reality that people are struggling to see opportunities in Australia, and they feel they have no choice. And that's something that we really have to change.
Okay, we've got through 2 major topics. We've got another 2 to do. It is 25 to 9. Should we take, is everybody happy to have a 5-minute toilet break so you can go get a drink and stretch your legs? But we'll try and keep it to 5 minutes because we're supposed to be out of here by 9:30. So we'll come back for the second half in 5 minutes. Okay. So our next topic is the national registration system. It's dry stuff. A comment from one of our participants tonight. Hang on, I haven't asked the question yet. A comment from one of our participants tonight which highlights the feeling about the new national registration system. I'm somewhat bewildered by the national registration system. Player, user experience and navigation, club admin management and reporting, functionality, implementation and transition. Who would like to have that one?
Well, it does say on
Joe.
here David Gallup's going to take this one.
Thank you. Go on, Joe.
I'm happy to step up. Well, look, I think the first thing the message we want to get across on this subject is that we have aspirations for this registration system that the current state certainly doesn't meet, and I guess those aspirations stem from the work we did around getting out to the community, gathering requirements, engaging people on that. So in the first instance, I guess what we learned from that is the existing systems we had in place, weren't fit for purpose in terms of, moving the sport forward and solving some of these issues that we've got in terms of the administration of the game. But I guess the key thing in terms of, that's led us to a position where we've had to move on. We've selected this system, and look, I think we fully acknowledge that in rolling that out, there's been, teething problems to say the least, and it's not necessarily a universal experience. I mean, this comment references user experience. I mean, we've had plenty of reports where somebody's actually had a good experience. They've got through the system, no problem, no dramas at all. But there's way too many, I suppose, bits of feedback that are on the other side of things. So we are currently, I guess, looking to close off the registration season, manage the issues as best we can, address the most pressing ones, and then really we need to turn our attentions back onto how we move forward, because what we have in place now is by no means where we'll be at this time next year. There's a commitment to keep investing, keep working, and evolve the system from here.
Questions?
If I can start there, Jeff Saul, I'm the president with the Rosalie Football Club in Gladesville, Hornsby, but I'll also say up front that I've spent many, many years now in ICT rollouts in New South Wales State Government from a user perspective. I'm not a technical person, but I've done lots of user work in that area. I'm wondering the level of user acceptance testing that went into this system, and I'm asking, as both a club president managing a volunteer group trying to run it, as well as a parent, coach, or not a player anymore, but a person registering through it, was there user testing running 6 months ago with a very large cohort of users at our level? I've seen so many of these problems at New South Wales State Government, these systems fall over, which are technically wonderful, and I love this system, what it will achieve. I can see it already, but these days we wouldn't roll it out without 6 months user testing of real live users. Did that happen here? Because the first our association knew about it, we seemed to be training on 1 December for a no-go live date of 17 December for a rollout date of 1 January. I'm not surprised it fell over, but I'm disappointed that we weren't testing it last June. Second question, and I'll throw both at the same time to the whole panel, have you recognised the actual problem that we have with this? And it's two. I can give you registrations we've lost. Players who are not in the system now because after a number of bad experiences they gave up. I know these are on the fringes. Most players will work their way through it and register, but on the fringes where you want the extra ones, they gave up and went somewhere else. But I think the big cost here is in my volunteer hours. My club registrar is spending 3 times the amount of volunteer hours, and that takes them out of somewhere else. We're a club of 500 players. We have a paid administrator for the first time. I'm hoping we were going to get through 10 hours a week at the maximum registration peak. Well, I think we've blown a year's budget on that in, 6 weeks of registrations, and I can't get that back.
Yeah, and look, just on the first point, on the second point, firstly, as we say, we're only too aware that the people using these tools are often volunteers, and that's time they just can't afford to give up. So we acknowledge that, and we apologise for making that job harder in some cases. So coming back to the user testing point, having had a rollout with the number of issues that we've had, you can't look at the testing strategy and say, you know, that was a tick, clearly. So in answer to your question, if we'd have taken more time, say another, you know, waited for the next registration system, had 6 months of additional user testing, I'm quite certain we would have got a different outcome. So absolutely couldn't agree with you more. There's going to be some hard lessons that we'll learn from this, and as I said, we're now moving into that phase. Teams have been 100% dedicated just to sort of, I guess, manage it, but we need to learn from the lesson and make sure that future rollouts of similar systems, or indeed the changes we implement next year, go a whole lot different. I think around the user testing, what it comes down to is, yeah, there was a significant amount of testing, but due to the different variables across different clubs, I mean, there's a lot of different variables that go into a registration. It's not like you're coming in just buying your national insurance and off you go. There needed to be a much more extensive degree of testing that allowed all those different variables to come in, because on 16th of December, with the amount of, I guess, packages that were set up and clubs that were on the system at that point, I don't think we had enough data from a testing point of view. So we absolutely take that on board. On your other comments, I just, you know, absolutely acknowledge that, and I think what we have to reiterate is the aspiration is for that amount of time on administration to go down. So we've taken, you know, if I take your assessment of things, we've taken a step forward. Next year we need to take 2 steps. Taking a step back, 2 steps forward next year.
Can I just, a final comment from me, totally support the aspiration. I want to see the thing work, because I've been through over more than 40 years in this game, so many good systems, but mostly bad systems. But can FFA, can anyone up there give me anything which helps me win back the goodwill that we've spent and lost, both with my volunteers and my players' parents? Because that's what I'm really looking for. How do I win back that goodwill? Because they're saying, seen it before, but this is the worst ever. I need them to trust us that it will be better. I appreciate everything you're saying, but what can you give me real time, real life, to win that back?
Look, in terms of rebuilding the trust, you know, I mentioned up front that there was a lot of engagement with the community to go out and gather requirements. And at that point, there was goodwill, there was trust, because we were listening. We have to do maybe not something of the same nature, but something similar. We've already spoken to a few associations that are saying, look, for next year, we want to be in this from the start in terms of what you're planning. We want to bring in, you know, we just want to be much more engaged than we were. And so I think we have to do that, and in doing that, again, build confidence that it's going to be different the next time around.
Okay, next question.
Thanks. Okay. My name's Chris Salmon. I'm the president of Epping Eastwood Football Club. In fact, we're Jeff's neighbour. We've been organising and playing football games since 1952, and we're one of the foundation clubs of our in fact, the foundation club of our local association. In the past 67 years, we've been helping people to register for and play football. When I first started doing this, we were sticking little photographs onto cardboard registration cards with the Perkins paste and that type of thing. We went through the first My Football Club online registration system, where on the first registration weekend the whole system crashed because 500,000 people tried to register at the same time, all right, which is going to happen. But I would much rather have used My Football Club this year than play football. I don't know, the existing system worked for us, we understood how to use it, and if somebody couldn't register, we could register for them. This year, for the first time ever, we sent people home because we couldn't help them. We said, you're better off to go home and try and work through this yourself, because We sat down, and the first instance we tried to help someone, it took us 45 minutes to register one person sitting next to them and working through the steps, right? Because of problems with the system, poor connections on the day, all sorts of things. It took us 5 or 15 minutes to register someone with a paper registration form and to go through the cards. Our effort as a club, as administrators of our club, has not gone down as a result of these electronic systems. It's gone up. And the purpose is supposed to be a labour-saving device. It hasn't happened. This year, for some reason in play football, if somebody can't register themselves, we can't help them. They have to go and do it themselves, or we have to sit next to them and try and point them the way through. Previously, with play football, we could knock in the back end and we could find people's records and sort them out and register. Now, I understand there could be problems with that sort of thing and having that sort of access and registering phantom people in football and all sorts of things like that, but it was very helpful to us. Our registrar is very dedicated. He already works long hours, and he'll be up till 1 o'clock tonight sorting out registration problems, as he's done for the last several weeks. Right? Without people like that, this would be a disaster. Right? So surely there are hundreds of team sports in the world. There's 200 countries. Somewhere, somebody must have done this already, surely. I mean, we can't be leading the world in online registration of team sport. I know we're not. Can't we find something that works and just import the whole thing, right? Because this is not what's happened. It's not what's happened. We're the guinea pigs. We might as well be beta testing for Microsoft. It's that bad, all right? And we've had issues where, for example, people have got to a point in their registration, decided not to pay, I'll come back later. They come back later and the system just crashes. We ring up, oh, that's a known issue. For 4 weeks, it's a known issue. In the middle of our main registration period, we don't know how to register these people. So,
Joe, is this a software issue?
These are the type of issues.
Your comment around surely someone somewhere is doing this better. To give you a bit of background, before landing with with Interact Sport, the provider who we've gone with for this solution, we started that talking to. There was a list of 15 organisations we spoke to, and part of that discussion was taking them through the requirements that we'd gathered from the community. And it's fair to say there's a degree of complexity in what we're trying to do that spooked some of them, and actually they didn't want to go further down the process. So there may be somebody doing registration in terms of what the experience is for the participant better, but the complexity that we put into it makes it quite hard for them to adapt that to our game. Now, that's not to say that working through the process, when we ultimately landed on Interact Sport, we weren't confident they could achieve this. Clearly, the complexity has, they've misjudged it. I think I'm probably quoting them in saying that. I'm not, I guess, without going across all your comments, it's a story, you're not the only person we've heard those comments from. Yeah, but yeah. Like I said, there are experiences, some people, there's groups of people who had a positive experience around it. It's not universally negative, but it's not good enough. We accept that. So, look, coming back to what I said earlier, next year has to be a whole lot different. We can't have, your man for the club up till 1 a.m.
Okay. Would you mind passing the mic along? Next question. Thank you. And then we'll go over there.
I just want to stay on this theme of the rego system. I've got a lot of experience in payment systems and other things which are critical, time critical, got to get the change of control right. There were good comments there before about systems being right. I don't feel like the FFA is owning this problem, like owning it and responding back. I'm hearing, oh, look, we've got some good feedback, some bad feedback. The user experience wasn't so bad. We've got hundreds of thousands of people registered. This was terrible. It was terrible, guys. At the front line, it's not the players or the parents. Some of the experiences that have been described, I sat with hundreds of people registering. and in the background, hundreds of people through the system, hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours across several people inside one club. You talked about 2,000 clubs around the front line are burnt. And it's not just the registrars, it's all the people that back those people up, and all the backup. All of that mindset, all that goodwill has just been sucked out. So we're starting a winter season, absolutely exhausted. And you're hearing a bit of passion come through, and I'm sure in other forums you heard this, is that we're exhausted. We've given up our work, we've taken things away from our families, we've taken a lot of expense and a lot of time, effort and energy, and it doesn't feel like the FFA is truly owning it. And I think there's other comments that have been made that I support, but the system is, by all the people I talk to in my association and in my area, and I'm truly the real community grassroots, the functionality is, at the present moment, is worse than the old system. The experience on the back end as an administrator is worse than the old system. The reporting, what happened to actually making sure at least the reporting of the old system was possible in the new system? None of that's happened. None of that experience. I think people are struggling at the moment trying to catch up and get answers to all these help desk tickets and make people feel a little warmer about this. But I think you're missing the problem is the front line, those people who are defending the NRF, those people who are talking up football versus AFL, those people who are doing their grassroots coaching courses and so forth, they're exhausted out there right now, and they don't hear from you guys. And there's letters being written, there's inquiries being things, and please, I'm saying it's a really serious dilemma out in the, it's almost like, well, if I'm going to hear another person talk to me about the NRF and why does money go up, I'm going to say screw the FFA, let them answer that question.
Okay, this is clearly the most emotive topic we've had tonight. Joe's answered most of the questions at the moment. Maybe this is for somebody else, maybe for David or somebody else on the panel. You say that it needs to be fixed next year, Joe. How is FFA going to do that? Are you going to put more resources behind this? Because clearly what we've heard tonight, this is not working.
It's not quite a full answer to you, Greg, that your suggestion that we haven't owned the problem, but I can tell you we've doubled the number of people on the help desk to 22 people when it was only 10 or 11. So we have endeavoured to put more resources into providing the people that are at the coalface, as you say, with help. I can't give you the. I don't know the technical deficiencies well enough to take you through them step by step. Go back to what Jeff said. People can recognise that it will be a better system once we get it there. It's a bit of a. I think it's a bit of a moment in time. In terms of, okay, we had the first ever online Rego system. We've now gone for a very much upgraded one. It'll probably never have to take that kind of quantum leap again. This was like a one-off step up, but it hasn't. As Joe said, the providers would tell us that they misjudged what they were doing and the complexity of it. On that first weekend, I know we did have a server outage that caused a lot of trouble. I mean, that's going to happen. We had a guy in Perth the other night who tells us he's done this stuff for years and years. And a little bit like you, he said, look, I can see where you're going and I can see that it's going to be great when you get there. You just misjudge the journey to get there.
Okay, next question, please. Yes, sir.
I guess for me is what's next? What's the timeline next? Is it competition management? Is it merging mini-roos across? Is it coach education courses? And are you reevaluating those timelines considering what's gone in the last 3 months?
The answer to that is, as I said earlier, we need to learn the lessons from this, have a proper project audit and sort of take it from there. But all those initiatives that you're referring to are in the planning stages now, and we need to make decisions around the timing of those that learn from those lessons and are, I guess, are more risk-averse decisions in that regard. But everything you've mentioned there is on the agenda.
Yeah, can I just add something? Is that,
Please do.
That right? Yep. I think it's great that everybody is so passionate about this topic because it is a really important topic for football. and we don't actually spend a lot of money on capital items like introducing a new competition system, and the only reason the money was prioritised was so that we could deliver a wow experience for everybody who was registering. Yeah.
I think you did that, Kelly.
And exactly, and so I think there does have to be some accountability back to the board, and we haven't done this yet. So I think we can undertake off the back of this forum that we will have a look into how we could have intended a differentiated wow experience. Those were the clear parameters of the project, and how we could fall so short of that. And whether that's a capability issue, or we didn't spend enough, or we picked the wrong vendor, or we didn't react fast enough, or our requirements were wrong, or the testing, whatever it is, we have to get to the bottom of it and own it as the FFA, and apologise to all of you for what you have experienced. It's not acceptable, and it has to be fixed with urgency. So we can, Chris, put it on our agenda for the next board meeting.
It's done. Two more questions before we move on to the final topic of the night. Gentleman in the white, and then the lady in the red top.
Hello, my name's Rowan Primrose, Vice President of Women's Football at Rosalie Football Club. Being married to one of our registrars, I probably won't touch on that too much because I haven't seen her too much in the last 2 months. I guess to share an experience of other parts of the play football system, staying away from the registration discussion we've had, the workflows I've found throughout the system are terrible. Even this afternoon, I'm also, one of my other hats is looking after our club website, so setting up coaches' pages for coaching education. One of our challenges is to get our coaches along to our coaching courses. Our club pays for the full fees, so all they have to do is commit volunteer time to do it, but even that is a challenge. So finding a course, yep, skills acquisition, click on the link, thinking, yep, great, it's going to take me to a course in my area, and it spits me out to the front. It's death by a million cuts at the moment, and every one of these little negatives is just making our job harder as volunteers. I guess as a club administrator, but also someone who invests fairly heavily in our North West Sydney Women's Association, we have heard rumblings of competition management systems coming on. What's the landscape for that time frame? What sort of testing will be going? Lessons learned from registration before we delve into that, because if we have had negative impact from a 2-month period for registration, imagine if we go through the same experience for 3 to 4 months of playing competition disruption.
Sorry. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I guess in terms of competition management, I think you're referring to qualification management system as well prior to, yeah, both of those things. You know, they've been on the, you know, I guess the to-do list from the start of this digital program. But as we said, I don't, you know, for me personally, I don't want to sit here and give you a specific date on each of those things now, because I think that would be a bad move at this stage, because we need to learn the lessons from the Rego rollout. We need to come back to you with timelines and dates that are supported by a change management plan that learns those lessons and sort of demonstrates you that this is why it's going to be different this time. So I guess that's my answer on that one.
Okay, thank you for your question.
Okay, mine's just actually comments. Francis Ravallo, President of the PM Football Association. Again, with approximately 12,500 members in my association, players, one being myself. So I can speak on behalf as a player as well as a committee person. Now, echoing my colleagues' comments, we have lost registrars, we have lost treasurers of clubs because of your system. I totally agree that FFA is not taking responsibility, but thank you very much for doing that, and thank you for putting that on the agenda. I would like to see feedback from the FFA as to updates of what's happening and where we're going, and expected timelines. We really need to have this fixed and we really need to have this fixed well before the 2020 season. The communication of apology needs to go out not only to associations and club people, but it needs to go out to the everyday parents that have experienced this rotten system that we have, because that's all I can say. It is absolutely rotten. I personally was one of the very, very lucky ones that had absolutely no problems, and my picture went up, everything worked perfectly. But I have 17 players in my team, and I was the only one that had no problems. So really, I was very, very lucky. I would like to thank Football New South Wales, because their responses to our queries and our tickets have been awesome. My general manager sent an email last Thursday at approximately 2 minutes to midnight, and the reply from Football New South Wales was in 3 minutes of that email being sent. So thank you very, very much, and I really appreciate your support.
Okay, thank you. I think that message has certainly been rammed home well and truly tonight about the national registration system. Let's move on to the final topic of the night. It's sort of related, I suppose, and this is support for community clubs. Many clubs are struggling to cope with the workload of running their local outfits. Here's an example. A quote: "As a long-standing grassroots player, coach, team, manager, parent and committee member, as well as having been involved at association level, I am keen to discuss the structure of grassroots football, girls and women's participation, volunteer fatigue and support for grassroots clubs." We could be here till about midnight with that one as well. Who would like that one? Go on, Emma.
Well, I think firstly we need to get to a space very quickly that we're resolving this registration issue, because the digital opportunity that arises for us is that we can actually provide greater tools to clubs, so that we can actually get to a point where you're not just spending the same amount of time, but you're spending less time, so that we can actually then spend more time on things like we were talking about over the break around facilities and engagement with government. So that's a really important thing, and for us, because of the breadth of football, digital is a great, efficient way for us to start to provide those practical tools working with member federations. So digital is important. But I think the important thing that's happening in grassroots is around this volunteer space. You know this better than I do. You know, there's less people volunteering, and people are not, have different priorities. So therefore, the commitment to volunteer over an extended period of time is changing. So, we as a sport and as sports generally, we need to think about ways to better support clubs with that space. Obviously, a trend that's happening is more paid volunteers coming into the club environment, and that might not be a bad outcome if we can make sure that as a result of that, the club is more efficient and participants and individuals in that environment are getting a good experience. But it is an ongoing challenge, I think, to better support grassroots clubs. But I would say that from a national perspective and with member federations as well, the grassroots club space is such a major priority for us. I can't remember your general's name, but you're the shop front, or I think it was you, sorry, talking about the NRF. You are the shop front. You are talking to parents and coaches about the game. So you're our advocates. Right now, do I feel that FFA is in a position to provide the right service tools so you can be a better advocate? No, I do not. I think there's some work to do for us to make sure that you have the right tools in place to become a better club, and also to better service participants across the board, because it is definitely a challenging space. And obviously, you've got younger people within that club environment, parents volunteering as well, and I think that we're in a unique position in football, which is different to say what happens internationally. Is the parent coach plays a pretty critical role within grassroots clubs. How we support that parent coach to give them the right tools as well is a critical part for us, and particularly in that mini-roos space. So I'd like us to get through this registration issue so we can start to talking more broadly about the adding value bit, which is important in the grassroots space, and how we can actually support clubs rather than just do the bare minimum of registrations and the governance things that are currently happening.
Okay, invite some questions on that specific topic, and as it's now 9:15, maybe got about 10-15 minutes left. Any other more broader topics? Yes, sir, at the back, and then we'll come over this side of the room.
Yes, hello, Rowan from Rosalie again. I guess to summarise, I'm a father of two mad football playing girls, also a player, referee, coach, club administrator. I'm not sure if there's any others we cover. I'll start with some observations which led to a program that we've started and then finish with a question. My daughter was a mad Western Sydney Wanderers fan. We went to a half-time minis kick-around when they played Sydney FC. It took her talking to Mark Yanko for about 3 minutes, and now we're a family of Sydney FC fans. I've also seen the impact, which leads back to the first topic, of AFL coming in to our Carlingford primary school with Western Sydney Giants players, and just the aura. And my girls know nothing about Aussie rules, but they've got the poster and they've got the signature and all that sort of thing. One thing that I started to think of was how to grasp those moments but also take them to a deeper level, which led to a program we've called the Rosalie Football Ambassador Program, which we ran last year for the first year, where we have Courtney Vine from Future Matildas and Alex Roberts from Western Sydney Wanderers coming into the club on a regular basis and really building up that rapport with the players so they start to remember the players' names and vice versa. And the added value and the impact we've seen in the girls, but also we're this year expanding it to the boys, and that has a whole lot of gender stereotype and breaking down those barriers and those sorts of themes. The impact we've seen at club level, and girls bringing their friends in, boys saying the best training session they had was when Alex Roberts took their training or their team for training session. So the question is, from the grassroots levels, we've done that on our own. We've sourced Parramatta Council grant funds to help fund and support our two ambassadors coming in. From the top level of the game, from W League, A-League, Matildas, Socceroos, what can FFA do to support us at the bottom level of the game to help build those sorts of relationships and programs?
I think you raise an excellent point, and that's that the talent in our game and the players are really critical to connect with community, and the research that we've done would indicate that grassroots players in particular do see value in providing a direct connection with the elite players at the top end of the game. I have to say, I think this is an area which football is poor at in comparison to our competitors. We have not been able to get A-League and W League, probably W League is a little bit different because of the length of the season, and even Socceroos to some degree, as active in the community as we would have liked. I think that AFL...
Why is that, Emma?
Pardon?
Why is that?
Well, because in NRL and AFL and their kind of CBA contracting, there's more care taken around the number of hours that they actually are engaged in the community, and we don't have that same level of kind of contracted ability to do that with players at
Somebody
the moment.
told me once that back in the days of the NSL, I'm not sure if this is correct or not, I think it was actually Bobby Despotovsky who told me this, that the players had built into their contracts they had to do 6 hours of community work per week. Is that correct? And if so, why is it not in the A-League contracts? Any idea?
There is so this is the challenging thing is there is hours built into the contracts, but it's not just about the players physically visiting a grassroots club or a school. We've got a bit of a mindset shift that has to happen, that the players understand that they're there to grow the game as well. So you shouldn't just send players that actually don't want to be there. That's detrimental. So this isn't just about the hours. It's actually, as a sport, are we getting our players activated to understand that their role is not just on the pitch, but they have to play a greater role within the game. I have to say, when I look at what's happened with the Matildas and the community engagement that sits around them, they want to be there. They want to stay behind an hour and a half to sign autographs, and people feel that genuine connection. I don't think that we've got that in the men's side of the game at the moment, and we have to bring that back because it's really important, because we're not there. We don't have the crowds that we want. We still need to grow the revenues in the game, and the male players and female players are going to play a critical role in that going forward.
Can I just add, the club participation agreements actually have the contractual requirement around community engagement. I think we need to reinforce to the clubs the expectations around this. It is a cultural shift. They need to understand that the next generation of boys and girls coming through like to see their heroes, and the more they can engage with them, actually it's better for that club. So we need to educate, and coaches included, I think, Simon, that this is part and parcel of being part of the wider football community, and it's an obligation that they have to enhance the brand and the sport by getting out there.
I mean, I think that's right, but I think we also have to recognise, and it's a great thing about our sport, the Daily Telegraph today ran 2 football photos. One was Sam Kerr, she's currently in Chicago, and the other was Matt Ryan saving a penalty, celebrating with his teammates an FA Cup quarter-final. So this is the selling point of the game, is that you play our game, you can go to the global stage and you can become a global superstar like those 2 players. The fact is, there wasn't a picture of local players in the Daily Telegraph today. There was Matt Ryan and Sam Kerr. No criticism of the Telegraph, Tom, Emma, but... Pardon? Sure, there was a story about Ninkovic, but it had no photo. I was about to say that there was a story about a local player, but the photo was Sam Kerr and Matt Ryan. It's a point worth making.
Okay, you can have a local player after the semi because Matty Ryan's team will lose anyway. So, sorry, we're going to move over to this side of the room. I think there are a couple of hands up over here. Yes.
More positive. I was making points about the registration system, but this area of...
Please do that, Greg. Go for 20 minutes.
The divide between FFA and grassroots clubs, and you're sort of like, well, how do you benefit things? I think you guys have got to spend a bit of time thinking about, and maybe come and ask us, what do we want? And I think clubs, some of the really small clubs, really large clubs, different needs. I'm taking out those tiers of development, the pathways for a moment, and saying grassroots, I still need to know how to select kids. I still need to know how to pick the right kids. I still need to know how to run a canteen or how to do my MPIO programs. And there's a myriad of things that's getting harder because the point was made, which is actually true, that volunteerism is down. But it's not volunteerism, like there's plenty of coaches and plenty of managers and plenty of people like being involved. But no one's taking the big step up anymore. No one wants to take a bigger civic responsibility. That's where the gap is, the leadership at clubs, the organisation, people wanting to be at grounds when their kids aren't playing, things like that. So I'm saying that maybe it's not FFA's role, maybe it's the federations, the state federations' role, but I think there's more, I think there's a positive vibe can come from you guys spending some time trying to study that and understand where you could add value, rather than sort of. I'm very positive about about where the national programs are going, and there's pathways for kids. I think we could debate all night about how to have different divisions and so forth. But at real grassroots, my challenge tomorrow is in wet weather, how do I get 25 mini-roos games played on a soggy pitch? And I think there are things that others know in this room and elsewhere around Clubland that could help me get that job done.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I would say I think that's a problem that is happening across Australian sport. It's not just football. I was on the board of the Sports Commission for 6 or 7 years, and the very last day I left the board, my last closing comment to them was work out ways to look after volunteers, because if you don't have volunteers, you won't have sport. And I think that's an issue for football because of the numbers and the stretcher resources, but it's also a challenge for every sport in the country and every community activity in the country. People are, unfortunately, not prepared to give their time like perhaps they were. There's too much other stuff you can do.
Greg, sorry, Simon. Greg, just to let you know, in terms of us trying to understand from Football New South Wales a little bit more about the challenges and the situations you're all faced with and experience. In the last 12 months, on 2 occasions, we went out to the broader stakeholder group asking what it is that you expect of us. Because as an organisation, you know, we need to continue to evolve in terms of our focus areas to ensure that it's aligned with the challenges that you're experiencing, etc. So on 2 occasions we did that, and I think it went out to maybe 1,000 different people from memory. Obviously, we didn't get 1,000 responses back. But one of the things that we took away from the responses that we did receive back was the need for us, as part of our strategy moving forward, to develop more capability building programs back to clubs. And one thing especially that came out was the need for Football New South Wales, and hopefully with the assistance of FFA and the other member federations, to build a club management handbook. Okay, something that actually helps the people who are managing, the volunteers, the administrators deliver the experience that you do so well in attracting people and keeping them in the football family on a weekly basis. We have a very strong philosophy here at Football New South Wales that the football transaction happens at clubs. Okay, when a kid says to their parent or guardian, "I want to play football," the young girl or boy are taken to their local club or the club that one of their schoolmates is at, etc. They don't call Football New South Wales and say, "Where can we, put our kid?" They don't call FFA. It's the clubs. I think it was mentioned before, the front line. We have moved our focus and attention as a Board of Football New South Wales, especially moving forward, to try and understand where it is that we can support, and hopefully we can build some strategies and tactics to do that.
Thanks, Anta. Question at the back, please.
Mine wasn't so much a question. I'm here representing an A-League club, and I suppose wanted to add some comments based on maybe not this immediate discussion, but the one prior regarding players. And I think it's just important to share that, and it's been talked about across the whole night, the game as a whole is completely under-resourced, and I think from an A-League club perspective, I would love to be able to bring players out to every single club every single week.
Which A-League club are you representing, by the way?
Sydney FC.
Thank you.
So I think, Emma raised some really great points. I have also worked in other codes, and we are challenged as a code in relation to culture around the players buying into the game, and that's for various reasons. We have a lot of marquees internationally coming into the game that don't potentially have to work as hard around promoting the game overseas, and that's a real challenge. And in addition to that, we're constantly having changing rosters as well, so it's hard for us to build brand presence for players and build kind of cult heroes, I suppose, to try and build the league up at a grassroots level. So I think we've said it tonight that we all need to work together a lot better, and I think the takeout that I have out of tonight is that not only do we need to get into a room together with, I work quite closely with some association contacts, but we need to work better with Football New South Wales and FFA all together in one room, which we don't often do, and I think we've all admitted that tonight, because working together is going to provide solutions across the game in everything that we've spoken about tonight.
Thank you very much. Question at the back here.
Frank Rossi, futsal. Over the last couple of years, futsal hasn't felt much of the love out of FFA. Just wondering what the plan or the agenda is for the next 12 months.
I hate to say it comes back to money, but we suspended the small input that we were making to futsal as a budgetary constraint. We'd love to reactivate that, but it was it was part of the cost-cutting exercise, the productivity review, as we called it, that happened in the previous budget.
Any other questions before we finish up? Yes, sir.
Just on a follow-up, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go on. One comment. Yep.
Rather than just leaving it at that, is there any way we can maybe get people around the table and discuss other options?
There is a...
Yeah, so I think that, look, there is acknowledgement that we've struggled to resource futsal, and I think we've spoken about this before. Other countries are obviously leveraging futsal to a higher degree than we are. It is an asset in our sport in terms of indoor in particular, so we recognise that. I think going forward, for us to progress, because we don't have the capacity or the expertise, we're going to have to work with others around the country, and there has been some work done at member federation level to start to do some thinking about how we can go about that. But I think from our perspective, we're not saying that we won't be doing futsal, we just have to find a different way to do it, because at the moment we just don't have the capacity to do it true justice. But I know that Football New South Wales work really hard in this area and are definitely leading in this space. And it might be about trying to leverage expertise locally to kind of drive a different way forward.
Frank, believe me, our board understands the cult status that futsal has, and what an incredible sport it is, really. So much so that Football New South Wales and the other member federations who are currently dealing with the clubs in this process of trying to understand where the new league or how the new league entity operates and sits. We've already, in negotiations, embedded that there should be some of the financial commitment from that league to FFA, specifically for the under-resourced parts of football, one being futsal, the other being the Pararoos. Okay, we unbelievably, what that organisation, the Pararoos and the Ability Football have done in actually winning the bid to host the Para Football World Cup, the Power Chair Football World Cup in 2021, and no one knows about it. I mean, these people have, it's a movement that's been pushed organically, and it's our responsibility as state body, national body, to actually start focusing back and look you guys in the eyes and see how we can support what you're doing, okay? So.
And I think that is, as Andy said, that is a positive spin-off of coming up with a model that the professional leagues can have their own place, make their own decisions around the professional league. It will free up time and resources to allow the national government body to concentrate on the things that it needs to concentrate on, and one of them will be new basic football.
Okay, it is 25 to 10. Last question of the night goes to you, sir.
As an Indigenous person, I'm curious to know why football is the only football code in Australia that doesn't have a reconciliation action plan. We have no documentation around how we engage with Indigenous communities, and considering that the largest proportion of Indigenous people who play football and population as a whole live in Western Sydney, why is it that you don't engage with Indigenous communities? It's all well and good that the Moriarty Foundation do what they do. They focus on regional and remote locations. And we have the National Indigenous Football Championships down in Nowra, and there's now a copycat carnival up in Queensland. But as a whole, as a code, you don't do anything. It's embarrassing.
So this came up at Northern New South Wales, and I think I give the same answer, which is something happened in football where it missed an opportunity to be in Indigenous communities decades ago. AFL and NRL, the opposite. And we're trying to catch up in that space. And it's not just down to John Moriarty. I've been to the last 2 championships in Nowra.
I've seen you there.
Yeah. I played walking football, quite difficult, because you want to run, you always want to run. And I think it's a shame, as you said, that sort of led to a split. We've assisted, out of last week's Northern New South Wales, we're going to assist with a team going to Arafura Games, so make a small contribution to that exercise. In Western Australia yesterday, or the day before yesterday, the federal government have allocated $750,000 to Indigenous football in Western Australia through Ken Wyatt, who's Australia's first Indigenous MP and obviously very interested in the space. I think the short answer is it's a catch-up thing for football. We missed an opportunity to get into those communities, whether they're in Western Sydney or remote communities. And I don't talk about my background in sport that often, but it's something that I was really proud of in my time in rugby league, is what we did for Indigenous Australians. I'd love to see football catch up in that space, because it's something I feel really passionate about.
Simon, can I just add, sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Yeah, my name's Lee.
Lee and Greg and Frank. So you've mentioned 3 things, one of them being community clubs and grassroots football, the Indigenous community and futsal. Very importantly, as part of the governance reforms that we undertook, all of the stakeholders of football last year, 3 things that came out of it, which were previously underrepresented, didn't have a conduit to FFA board and senior management, were those areas. And in the governance reforms, in the constitution, the statutes of the FFA now, we have a futsal committee, which the FFA I think will be composing shortly, a grassroots and community football committee, and these committees are made up of people from, as part of your environment, your constituents, etc., and also an inclusivity committee for the Indigenous football community, etc. So these are only 4 months old in terms of building them into the framework, embedding them into the culture and environment of football. But, I just took the opportunity, maybe it was a coincidence, but 3 incredibly important areas of football that previously haven't had a direct conduit to FFA board that now do.
So they're in 3 tranches. The first one was the end of January, and that's been done. We wrote to members yesterday about the second tranche, which is 31 March, and the balance will be during the course of the balance of this year. So all those items, as Anta said, that have been raised were specifically addressed by the Congress Review Working Group and implemented in a tangible way so that we can start having the dialogue.
I know I said that was the last question. We're going to have one more.
Sorry, just to I guess piggyback on the back of that one, an area that I'm very passionate about and very heavily invested in is better engagement with refugee and asylum seeker communities. I think that is a big area of concern. I don't think you'll find a more dedicated, determined and football-loving community than the Indigenous and refugee communities, and they're probably the most needing at this moment in time. On the back of the Hakeem case, I think there's a good opportunity for the FFA to really step up to the plate on that point.
Chris?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's an evolving space. I come from Melbourne, where there's a lot of communities like that, Western Melbourne Group, for instance, which is the new consortium down there, that's part of their business plan, is how do they engage those communities and get them part of the new group. So yes, I think the point was made earlier that this is a unique sport. You come to this country, you already know football, we don't have to educate you. We just need to trap you in our sport and get you to be part of the football family.
So can I
just say that we
sorry,
already have a few projects in New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, which are starting to be more engaged, and that's something that we would actually like to increase over time to provide greater support. And, we talked about cost, and we understand that cost is one of an issue. We're particularly looking at, the refugee community as well.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, I appreciate that. But can I also recommend maybe in having some more community forums, actually looking to engage with and invite very resourceful, self-determining communities that are running their own tournaments, programs, already engaging with NPL state clubs and grassroots clubs themselves, inviting them in to attend forums like as this one, and maybe going out to their suburbs and to their LGAs, Blacktown, Bankstown, etc., and starting that dialogue with them directly.
Okay. That I think just wraps it up for tonight. It is 20 to 10, so we've gone a little bit over time. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending tonight. Really appreciate you coming out here and asking such pertinent questions, and please thank our panel as well for giving up their time too. Thanks very much.